I was already in my good coat when my neighbor grabbed my arm and told me not to go inside yet. It was the day of my son's wedding, my only son. I had been planning for this day for 2 years. The dress, the alterations, the small pearl earrings I hadn't worn since my own wedding 41 years ago. I had driven 3 hours to get there. I was standing on the stone path outside the venue with my handbag over my wrist and my heart full of something I couldn't quite name. Pride, maybe. The particular kind of pride that also aches. And Ruth Ann, my neighbor of 19 years, the woman who had watered my plants when my husband passed, who had sat with me in the emergency room the night I thought I was having a heart attack, and it turned out to be grief. Ruth Ann took one look at me and said quietly, "Don't go in through the front. Come with me. There's something you need to hear first." I almost laughed. I thought she was going to tell me I had lipstick on my teeth. I didn't have lipstick on my teeth. She walked me around to the side of the building, to a narrow corridor between the reception hall and the catering entrance, and she stopped me just outside, a door that was propped open about 3 inches. She put her finger to her lips, and then she pointed. I listened. It took me a moment to understand what I was hearing. Then it took me another moment to accept it. My son was speaking, and he was speaking to a woman whose voice I had heard at my dinner table 14 times in the past 18 months. A woman I had given my mother's recipe box to. A woman I had taken shopping for her wedding shoes. "She won't fight it," my son said. "She doesn't understand how any of it works. She never did." A pause. "And the account?" his fiancée asked. Her name was Delia. I had liked her. I want you to understand that. I had genuinely liked her. "It's already structured," he said. "Once we're married, the inheritance transfers. That's how Dad set it up. She gets the house. We get the rest. And she doesn't know. She doesn't know." I stood very still. Ruth Ann had her hand on my arm. I could feel the pressure of her fingers, but I couldn't feel much else. There was a sound in my ears like water, like standing too close to a river. I had stopped breathing without realizing it. My husband, Roland, had died 14 months earlier. Pancreatic cancer. 6 weeks from diagnosis to the end. We had been married 41 years, and I had not been ready. I don't think anyone is ever ready, but I was especially not ready, because he had always handled the money. Not because I wasn't capable, because we had divided things, the way couples do, and that had been his. I trusted him completely, and so I had never looked very closely. After he died, I learned that he had set up a trust, a complicated one. There were conditions in it I didn't fully understand. I had a lawyer, a family friend, someone Roland had known for decades, who told me everything was fine, that I was protected, that I should not worry. I had believed him. Standing in that corridor with my good coat and my pearl earrings, I understood that I had been wrong to believe him. I didn't walk in through that door. I wanted to. Part of me wanted to throw it open and stand there and let them see me. But Ruth Ann's hand tightened on my arm, and when I looked at her, she shook her head very slightly. "Not yet. Not like this." We walked back to the parking lot. We sat in her car. She turned on the engine for the heat, and neither of us said anything for a long moment. "How long have you known?" I finally asked. "I wasn't certain," she said. "I heard something at your house 2 months ago when they came for Sunday dinner. I was in the kitchen helping you, and they were on the back porch, and I heard your son say something about the trust, about a clause. I didn't know enough to understand it, but I didn't like how it sounded." She paused. "I didn't want to say anything until I was sure. I didn't want to be wrong about him." I nodded. "I understood that. You don't want to be the person who tells a mother something like that unless you are absolutely certain." "What do we do?" she asked. I sat there for a moment. Outside, cars were pulling in, guests arriving, women in heels picking their way across the gravel. In about 40 minutes, my son was going to marry a woman who had sat across from me at Easter and complimented my centerpiece and asked me about my childhood, and the whole time she had known. "I need a lawyer," I said. "Not Roland's lawyer. A different one." The wedding happened. I went inside. I sat in the front row and I watched my son marry Delia, and I smiled at the right moments, and I cried a little. which wasn't difficult because I was already very close to crying for reasons that had nothing to do with happiness. Nobody could have told, looking at me, that anything was wrong. I have been a composed woman my entire life. It is not always a virtue, but on that particular day it served me. At the reception, I danced once with my son. He held me the way he always had, the way he had since he was a teenager, with one hand on my shoulder and the other holding mine out to the side, and he looked so much like his father in that moment that my chest tightened. He kissed my cheek and said, "I'm glad you're here, Mom." And I said, "Of course. Where else would I be?" I drove home that night with Ruthann. She had come as my guest. Roland's family had always considered her part of things, and she didn't push me to talk. She put on the radio, low, and we drove through the dark, and I sat with everything I now knew pressed flat against the inside of my chest, like something I was trying to keep from escaping. When she dropped me off, I said, "Don't mention this to anyone yet." She said, "Obviously." That was a Wednesday. By Friday, I had a new lawyer. Her name was Joyce Alderman. I found her through a woman in my book club whose divorce had been, in her words, the most complicated legal situation in the history of this county, and who had emerged from it with everything she was entitled to, and a few things besides. If Joyce could handle that, I thought, she could handle me. I sat across from her in her office, clean desk, no clutter, a small cactus on the windowsill, and I told her everything. The trust Roland had set up, the lawyer who had explained it to me, and whom I now no longer trusted. What I had heard in that corridor, the way my son had said she doesn't understand how any of it works. The way Delia had said, and she doesn't know. Joyce listened without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment, looking at her notes. "Do you know the name of the trust?" she asked. I did. I had gone home after the wedding and gone through every folder in Roland's filing cabinet. 4 hours, the whole thing spread across the dining room table. Until I found it. I had the documents with me. She looked through them for a long time. I sat across from her and watched the cactus on the windowsill and waited. "Okay," she said finally. "There is a clause here." She set the papers down. "Your husband's attorney structured this in a way that is not illegal, but very favorable to your son. If your son marries and you do not update this document, a significant portion of the liquid assets transfer to a joint account in his name. The family home is protected, but the investment accounts, the savings, the proceeds from Roland's business sale." She paused. "Those would move." "How much?" She told me. I had not known there was that much. That was the first surprise. The second surprise was this. It hadn't happened yet, because the trust had a 30-day window, 30 days from the date of the marriage for the transfer to be initiated. They hadn't counted on me finding out before that window closed. "What are my options?" I asked. "Several," she said, "and I want you to understand that you have more power in this situation than you currently feel like you have." I did not call my son, not right away. What I did instead was meet with Joyce 3 more times over the following 2 weeks. I learned things about my own financial situation that I should have learned years ago, and I am not proud of that, but I am also not going to sit here and pretend that women of my generation were encouraged to know these things, because we were not. Roland hadn't kept me ignorant on purpose. We had simply never questioned the arrangement. It had worked until it didn't. Joyce filed the documents necessary to contest the trust structure. She also helped me understand that Roland's original lawyer, the family friend, had made a significant error. Whether it was negligence or something more deliberate, she said carefully, was something we could pursue if I wanted to. I told her I would decide that later. One thing at a time. The thing about discovering that your child has been calculating behind your back is that it doesn't arrive all at once. It comes in waves. I would be fine, making coffee, watching the evening news, calling Ruthann to talk about nothing, and then suddenly I would think of something specific. The way my son had said she never did, as though my not understanding the trust was a character flaw. The way Delia had asked me, at that Easter dinner, whether Roland had been good with money, and I had said yes, very, and she had smiled and said that's so nice. I had thought she was just making conversation. I cried about it, some. Mostly at night, in a way I hadn't since Roland died. Not the same kind of grief. This was sharper, more specific. The grief of recognizing someone you love and not being able to find them in the recognition. My son called me twice during those 2 weeks, normal calls. How are you settling in? How was the drive home? Delia says hi. I answered normally. I asked about the honeymoon, which they had taken to Portugal. I said it sounded wonderful. My voice was steady. I was always good at steady. The call I'd been waiting to make, I made on a Tuesday morning in the 3rd week. I called my son and I asked if he and Delia could come to dinner on Saturday. I said I wanted to have a proper celebration now that they were back and settled. He said, of course. Mom, we'd love that. I spent Saturday morning cooking. I made the pot roast Roland had always requested for his birthday, the one that takes 4 hours and makes the whole house smell like something permanent and good. I set the table the way my mother had taught me. I put out the good china. They arrived at 6. Delia hugged me in the doorway. She smelled like expensive perfume, and she told me the house looked beautiful. My son kissed my cheek. We sat down. We ate. We talked about Portugal, the food, the light, a little village they had found on the 3rd day. I asked questions, and I listened, and I watched them both, and I thought about the corridor, outside the reception hall. And I thought about my husband saying she doesn't understand how any of it works. And I thought about 41 years of a life that had now, in some way I was still measuring, been left to me to figure out alone. After dinner, I asked if they would sit with me in the living room for a moment before dessert. They sat down on the sofa. I sat in the chair across from them, Roland's chair, the one that still held the shape of him, a little, and I folded my hands in my lap, and I told them what I knew. I did not raise my voice. I told them about the corridor. I told them what I had heard. I told them about Joyce. I told them about the 30-day window that had now, as of that morning, closed, and that the documents Joyce had filed meant the trust structure was under formal legal review. I told them the amount that they had apparently been expecting to receive. My son went very pale. Delia's expression changed in a way I won't describe, except to say that it changed quickly, and it changed completely, and that what I saw underneath the expression she had been wearing all evening was not something to say something. My son started to say something. He stopped. He started again. Mom, I'm going to tell you what I've decided, I said, and then I'm going to let you talk. I had thought about this carefully. For 2 weeks I had sat with the version of this conversation where I simply cut him out, gave everything to Ruth Ann and a few charities, and let him find out from a stranger. It would have been satisfying in a particular way that I'm not ashamed to have considered. But I had also sat with the version where I burned the whole thing down and spent the rest of my life eating pot roast, alone and wondering if I had made the right call. What I decided was something in the middle, which is where most real things live. The trust has been restructured, I said. Joyce has made sure that what is mine is protected in a way that is clear and unambiguous and cannot be reinterpreted. When I die, which I do not plan to do for quite some time, what I choose to leave you will be left in a way that reflects the relationship we have between now and then. You understand what I'm saying. He was very still. Delia, I said, I don't know how much of this was your idea and how much was his, and frankly, I've decided I don't need to know. What I need to know is whether we are going to be able to have a real relationship. A real one, not this. Delia looked at her hands. She didn't say anything. My son said, Mom, I'm sorry. And the thing was, I believed him. Not completely, not yet, not in the way I had believed him before I stood in that corridor. But I believed that he meant it in the moment, that it was real, whatever it was worth. I know you are, I said. We sat there for a little while. Eventually, I got up and brought out the dessert. We ate it. It was uncomfortable and honest, and nothing was resolved in the way that it gets resolved in movies, where someone cries and hugs, and everything resets. He called me the next morning. He wanted to explain things. I listened to the explanation. How it had started as a what-if conversation. How Delia had brought it up first, but he hadn't pushed back the way he should have. How he had told himself it wasn't really wrong, because technically it was already set up. That way, the money would have come to him eventually. I had heard versions of that logic before, from other people about other things. The way we convince ourselves that what we're doing isn't what we're doing. I said, I hear you. I'm not ready to say we're okay, but I'm not done with you. There was a long pause on his end. Okay, he said. Okay, I said. The thing I keep coming back to is Ruth Ann. How she stood in that corridor with me and didn't let me go crashing through that door in my good coat and my pearl earrings, which is absolutely what I would have done if she hadn't held my arm. How she had carried what she suspected for 2 months without saying a word to anyone. Not even me, because she wasn't certain and she didn't want to be wrong about someone I loved. When Joyce finished the restructuring, I made an appointment with her for one additional item. It was brief. It took about 15 minutes and required only a small amendment to a separate document. Ruth Ann doesn't know yet. I'll tell her eventually. Maybe over dinner, maybe over the phone, maybe in the car with the radio on low the way we drove home from the wedding. I'll tell her that her name is in it now, that I put it there because 19 years of someone standing beside you in the difficult moments is not nothing. It is, in fact, exactly the thing that matters. She will tell me I didn't have to do that. I will tell her I know. And I will mean it in the way that things are true when you have lived long enough to understand that loyalty is the rarest thing there is and the only inheritance worth leaving.